Providence Academy podcast. I am Chelsea Abbott, and I am the head of our Grammar campus. With us today, we have Charla Kite. Mrs. Kite is our curriculum director at the Grammar campus, and today we're going to talk about, curriculum.
All things curriculum.
All things curriculum, one of your favorite things.
Yes.
So in our classical, the Heart of Classical Education podcast episode, you talked about the skeleton and the heart when we're looking at schools. And we talked about how the skeleton makes up like our curriculum.
Right.
And there are pieces of that are non-negotiable when we're talking about classical schools.
Right.
So why don't we talk through just what curriculum we use at Grammar, why we use it, and how that ties in just our own philosophy of classical education.
Yeah. So I think a good place to start is with reading.
Yep.
And we have formal reading instruction at Providence in kindergarten, first grade, and second grade. So this is that time when we're learning to read rather than reading to learn. And so this is an area that would definitely be a non-negotiable.
That's right.
For us as a classical school, and for me personally, yes.
Yeah.
So we first kind of need to understand that we've kind of got two approaches to reading, to teaching kids how to read. So we've got a whole language approach, which is where kids are kind of looking at a word and memorizing the way that word looks. Now, we do have some words, so this might be, you see a sight word list. And we do have words that are, commonly appearing words where we maybe haven't learned the rule to, or it has an irregular rule. And so our kids will encounter some words like that.
Right.
But for the most part, instead of looking at our picture clues or that kind of thing, we want our kids to learn why that word says the way it says what it says. Why does it sound that way?
Right. And I'm glad you said that about picture clues, because one thing you'll hear with that kind of approach is the books might have a certain pattern to them when kids are learning to read, and it might be look at the pumpkin.
Right.
Well, they don't know how to read the word pumpkin if it were isolated, but the picture is a picture of a pumpkin.
That's right.
And so they think they're reading.
Right.
But really,
right. So they use a lot of picture clues, or, this is one of my favorite ones where it's get your mouth ready to say this word. Well, how do I get my mouth ready if I don't know that?
That's right.
So there's some things like that and that just doesn't honestly teach good skills. It really can it can put us in a place where we're using some poor habits. And we may not notice those things until they're about third grade, when the text becomes harder and when we have fewer picture clues to rely on. So that, in my humble opinion, is just not the way that we want to approach reading with our kids.
And that's hard because, some people will say, well, I learned to read that way. And some people
That's right.
do.
That's right.
Some people do.
Right. So, I had a professor once tell me that some kids are just going to learn to read. They're just going to learn it. And so, but the thing is, if we use a phonetic approach, we catch everyone.
That's right.
Whereas if we're using a whole language approach, we're going to catch some of them, maybe some years the majority, but there are some other kids who just aren't going to get it that way. Why wouldn't we just take an approach that everyone can learn from? And so that's why we have a curriculum we use all about reading in kindergarten, first and second grade, where this is when kids are learning how to decode. So how to break those words down, how to read them. And it is based on the science of reading. Now, in education right now, science of reading, there's a lot of talk about that. Right. And so people are starting to realize that this is what we need to come back to. But we've always been doing that here. We've never, and that really is kind of a cornerstone, I think, of classical education. It's one of those non-negotiables.
And like you said, even as a mom, when we were looking at schools for Care Beth and Benton, that was important to me, was what is your philosophy as far as reading instruction? How do you believe that kids learn how to read? That was important to me.
Yes.
And it put me at ease to hear we have a solid curriculum that's phonetically based.
That's right. So all about reading, like I said, kindergarten, first and second grade. But then kids also, so part of that approach is we believe that they learn to decode words first, and then they learn to encode words, so spell those words, build those words later. So kids will see this information when they learn these rules as they're learning to read, and then they come back around to the rules. Because we learn how to decode before we learn how to encode. And so they come back to those same rules in spelling. And so rather than, traditionally you might see in some schools, or maybe this was the way you had spelling, but you're given a list on Monday, you take a test on Friday.
That's right.
And that's not how we do it here. We want to take a test based on a rule. So no matter what words you were given, I know the rule and I can apply that rule to my spelling words for the week. And so all about spelling, we actually do that kindergarten through 5th grade. And it's kind of a staggered approach. So the levels don't exactly match up with grade level. So that can be tricky, but it's important to understand why that is the way it is, but it really is because we have to see it in reading before we're able to build words that way. So that's all about reading and all about spelling, and I honestly think that is a very solid curriculum, and I am very glad, like you say, as a mom, not just because of this position that I'm in, but as a mom, that this is the curriculum we utilize for reading and spelling. And then we use Saxon math in kindergarten through 5th grade.
It spirals.
And it's spiral. So what that means is your student might learn something on Tuesday, and then when they go home on Wednesday and they do their homework, most of the problems they're going to encounter are review of other previous concepts that they've learned, and their new concept might just be a couple of the problems, but it's going to come back, and they're going to keep building on that and building on that. And so it's not that's very different from a unit-based approach where we're learning this one thing. Now that changes a bit as they get older, but remember, we're in that grammar stage where we're seeing that repetition and that cycling. But
even when I taught in a public school, it was, we do fractions this quarter, and then we might not ever touch it again all year long. And so they forget because they're not practice. The best way to learn math is to practice math, and they're not practicing it. And so when it's segmented like that, there's no mastery.
Right. And especially, we talked in the previous podcast that we did about the heart of the classical model. We talked about drill and repetition. That's where you see that here in math is, drill, repetition. Those are not bad things, even though we may have been told that in recent years in education. But we see that a lot in Saxon, which fits into our model of where we are in the grammar phase. And that kind of segues into Shirley English.
Yes.
We all know that when we talk about the trivium, that we talk about how in the grammar phase there's a lot of songs and jingles and chants, and so Shirley English, we know, if you have any experience with that,
and I love Shirley so much.
Yes. I think so. That one is one where you can see that's definitely a curriculum where we are capitalizing on that ability to memorize those songs and then refer back to them later, and it builds. That's not to say that your student can't come in the 6th grade and learn Shirley. They most certainly can do that. But you can also see with some of our kids who've been doing Shirley for a long time that, they didn't have to come in 6th grade and relearn the noun jingle. They've been singing that noun jingle since 1st grade. And so I think
without even thinking about it.
Right. And so I think that Shirley lends itself really nicely to showing how those things fit well within our model.
That's right.
Science, we use Answers in Genesis starting in 2nd grade. And again, we're going to see an overall big spiral approach in the sense that they're going to study plants and animals in 3rd grade. they're going to take in a lot of information that year, but they're going to come back around to it. They're just, again,
Facts.
They're facts. They're putting those facts in there. They're absorbing all the information. They're creating their peg, and they're going to come back around to it. Starting in 6th grade, they start to see, they use Bob Jones, starting in 6th grade, Bob Jones curriculum. And so in that curriculum, you're starting to see we're not just talking plants and animals. We're talking about all these different aspects of science. So they come back around starting in 6th grade to what they learned in 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade. And so, again, we're seeing a big cycle that our kiddos are getting to experience while they're here at Providence. And, again, you can come in later and still get in on that cycle. That's the beauty of it. They're going to see it again when they leave grammar and they come over here to upper. So yeah, it's not like if I don't get in here right now, I can't get in on that. That's not true at all. You may have some things that you work on to get you to a place, where you're feeling comfortable with it, but you can definitely do it.
That's right. Talk to us about writing. So kindergarten and 1st grade looks a little bit different with writing, but then in 2nd grade.
Yes. So kindergarten writing is so fun. It's they do a lot of journal writing, so they have a prompt and they're working on forming a sentence.
That's right.
How a sentence has to start with a capital letter, and what does it have to end with, and we have to put spaces in between our words. And you don't think about those things until or maybe you forget about them.
Sitting with your 5-year-old.
And then, we're doing that right now in kindergarten. And so you're working on, taking that little finger and putting a space in between your words. So that's really what writing is in kindergarten. You do see a lot of growth that year because they really start thinking about, they know all their sounds, and they really are starting to apply that to not only producing those sounds, but then I'm going to put that on paper.
That's right.
So we see a lot of growth there.
And so that's what we're looking for in kindergarten is just that phonetic spelling.
Yes.
So it might not always be correct.
That's right.
But it's what they hear.
And in fact, when you see that, it's great. You see it. It's not alarming. It's great because they're applying those sounds literally to their writing. They're taking what they're hearing and they're trying to break it down and put it on paper. When they go to 1st grade, they're really trying to learn paragraph structure. So they take their organizers and they organize their thoughts and they learn a topic sentence and they learn how to make a paragraph and they write it. And when you see it, you think, wow, you're 6 or 7 and you wrote a whole paragraph. Amazing. But they can. They really can.
And they go through the writing process.
That's right. They brainstorm. They'll fill out their graphic organizer. They'll brainstorm. They'll write a rough draft. They learn how to edit it, and then they write a final copy.
That's right.
And so it is really amazing to see, little guys who are so little to go through that whole writing process, but they do. And then in 2nd grade we use IEW, and that goes all the way up through 8th grade, and it is really an amazing curriculum in my opinion. They really learn how to take a source text and they read it and they're able to then turn it into a keyword outline, and they learn how to include strong verbs and quality adjectives and prepositional phrase openers and all these different things that then when you read the final product,
it's unbelievable.
It is unbelievable. It is. It really is.
My 2nd grader, we're kind of just really getting into that. And so we're not even to all of those. We're like quality adjectives. We're looking for good, strong adjectives right now. But I'm telling you, what she is able to produce is unbelievable.
Yes.
And she read it for my husband the other day, and he was like, she wrote that?
It really is.
Just amazed.
It
and
is.
I'm like, she did.
Right. And what's so neat about that process with IEW is that at first, they have a checklist to follow. Right. So it's prompting them to remember, did you include your quality adjectives? Did you do this? But then they get to an age where they can automatically, as they're writing them, they do it in the process. Rather than adding it maybe in your rough draft, they automatically go, oh, you know what? I could use a better verb right here. And so they automatically do it. And they're so proud of themselves.
Yes.
And some of the words that they can come up with, some of the strong verbs or the quality adjectives, you're like, wow, that was
I
really
know.
creative.
Yes.
And so it really does. It really pushes them as writers, I think. I think it's a very strong curriculum. And I love how, especially at Grammar Campus, how we try to, it's theme-based writing. And so we're trying to, as closely as we can, put that to where they are in history. So again, we're seeing that integrated learning.
Yeah. And even like biblically.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
And that's a perfect segue.
Yes.
Bible and history.
That's right. Bible and history. So we use Veritas and Story of the World for history. They start with that in second grade. And where they are in the timeline or, in the history of our world, they do what they're doing in history. They're learning right along that in Bible. And so our kids get to start in ancient Egypt in second grade, and then they'll actually cycle back around to that, and they'll come back to it as an eighth grader, and they'll start that whole process over. So at Grammar Campus, from second grade all the way to sixth grade, they start with ancient Egypt, but then in sixth grade they go all the way to modern times. And so it's really, really cool to see the timeline unfold for them. It really is an amazing process, and to not only see that history timeline unfold, but to see the thread of God throughout the story of mankind, from the fall all the way to where we are.
That's right.
So
and I would say that's a non-negotiable.
Yes.
Even the way in which we teach our Bible and our history.
Right.
I would say.
Go hand in hand.
Hand in hand, non-negotiable.
Yep. Yeah. And a lot of those things, are pretty much, there are other curricula, I should say, that maybe do the same thing for, English or math or, there are others, but it's just there are some common themes that you have to be careful when we're looking at that curriculum and making those choices for our school. Right. And so I personally think we've got very solid choices, kindergarten all the way up through 12th grade, and that we really do see the reason as to why those choices were made and why those things are here for our students to utilize.
So we talked a little bit about like kindergarten through second grade. They're learning how to read. Right. Mm-hmm. So talk to us about like specifically the literature that's used like in third through sixth grade.
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite things, is just to get to see the books, the literature, the rich literature that, personally that my boys are going to be exposed to. Some of the things that they do, I just think, wow. I I'd never even heard of that book at that age, and if you're a parent that, most of us, as just a side note, we're trying to give our kids an education that we didn't ourselves receive. Right. And so sometimes, you might be talking to someone and they're very well read and they've read these awesome books, and you may feel insecure about it.
It's intimidating.
Right. But don't. If your child is reading, you get in fourth grade and they're reading Dangerous Journey and you've never read that, you've never even heard of Pilgrim's Progress, that's okay. Read it now with them. Right. And then you've read it, so don't worry about that. Don't ever feel bad about that, because I promise you, as they get older and they're in the upper campus, they are going to be exposed to very rich literature that I had not heard of until I was an adult, and that's okay. I'm going to learn it right alongside him.
And even if you have, I even remember the first time I read Charlotte's Web out loud to Kermith, and that is a book that, it's like, I couldn't even tell you. I loved Charlotte's Web. Read it. I couldn't even tell you how many times. But it's different when you're reading it with your kid for the first time. And that is just one of my, sweetest memories.
Oh, yeah. I have a similar story. So my favorite author is C.S. Lewis. And so whenever my boys came to Providence and we were going to read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe as a third grader, I was much older than third grade when I read that book for the first time. But I remember my middle son reading that, and he just stopped and he was like, I just realized that Aslan is Jesus. And he's talking about that, and I just was like, oh my goodness. Buddy. This is the whole reason why we came here,
That's right.
Anyway, so I know that's kind of off, but the literature really does produce these conversations that we may not otherwise have if we wouldn't have been reading that book together. And I would encourage you that it's good to read them together. You know, you don't always. Sometimes I feel like maybe that was a question I had when I first started out on this journey.
Can I read this?
Can I read this with him? Can we take turns reading? Of course. Because some of my most...
In fact, please do.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Because some of my fondest memories thus far really have been centered around what we were doing for... and what we're doing for literature.
And also, like, those 3rd through 6th graders, like, they're able, typically, they're able to recall words. They're able to read that text. But oftentimes, especially with like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, that is a deep book, right? And they may need support in their thinking.
Right. And they can go so much deeper and have those, because the point again is always, how can we view this text in light of God's word? And so they're just not there, and that's okay. You know, maybe spiritually quite yet, but if they have that conversation with you, they can get there.
That's
you know,
right.
it dawns on them and they're like, oh my goodness. And then you got to see that.
And you got to do it with them.
Be the one to do it. So yeah, some of my very favorite books are, you know, I think all the way from kindergarten all the way up into upper campus, just some excellent literature choices that our kids will be exposed to. Of course, you know, C.S. Lewis, but then also in 6th grade they read Charles Dickens, and you know, in 4th grade, Dangerous Journey, which is, you know, you're talking about Pilgrim's Progress, and just some of the books that they read. And sometimes I know that we can, you know, we're really having these fond memories and we're sharing all this. Some of the books they don't love.
Right.
And that's okay too. You know, really that helps you to see that, you know, this isn't my favorite, and it might take me, it might be a little bit harder for me to read it, but there's still value for me.
Right.
You
and
know,
there's still truth to be
That's
found.
That's right. And so they might not all be your child's favorite, you know. I know we sound like it's all, it's so lovely. And it is, but sometimes it's not. And that's okay too. You just, you know, you can still glean so much from it.
Well, and we talk about this, we're kind of getting off a little bit too, and I tell my kids this, you know, there is just joyful obedience, right? Like, we're going to just do what's asked of us. We're going to do it as if we're doing it unto the Lord. And it might not be super fun, but we're going to do it with as joyful of a spirit as we can.
That's right. So all that to say, our literature, I think we have very rich literature, and our kids are very little being exposed to that, and I think that's great. Great thing at Providence.
I agree. Well, that is just kind of a brief overview of our curriculum. Mrs. Kite is always open to discuss that more, and any questions that you have, we want to hear them. So we will, thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you. And if you have questions, I am happy to answer. And if it's an upper question, I can definitely point you in the right direction that can give you the answer that you need.
That's right. All right, we will see you guys next time.